Merry Christmas Eve. Today is December 24th. It is 2025 and tomorrow is Christmas. So I'm sitting here in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm making some sides for our Christmas potluck on tomorrow. We're going to be doing heavy hors d'oeuvres, which is something that we would typically do for New Year's Eve, but we're just wanting to do something a little different for Christmas. And then, for New Year's Eve, we'll probably do a meal. Anyway, whatever. So I'm sitting here and I am just kind of quietly meditating. And 2025 for me has been such an up and down year. It hasn't been bad. It's really been a year financially not what I thought it would be. And so I am talking to God about my finances. And I'm just like, Lord, I used to live in California. And I'm like, Lord, when I lived in California, I was so prosperous. I didn't struggle. I did go through homelessness, but after I came out of homelessness, it was just up for me. And I was just doing so great. And I said, when I moved back to Atlanta, it's just been so financially unstable, just like all over the place. And I'm not used to that. So I was like, God, what happened? And he said, your faith. He said, when you're in California, you had big faith and you believed. And I said, well, yeah, I'm here in Atlanta and I pray and I believe things. I said, but nothing's manifesting. And so I said, Lord, show me the moment, like show me what really motivated and pushed my faith. And so he did. So I want to start from the beginning. So I was in Atlanta and I was kind of at the end of my rope as far as feeling how I was feeling in life. And I was working this corporate job and I had gotten this corporate job by reference and I was making like $13 an hour. So I wasn't making a lot of money at all, but I had experience. So I was doing a job that was similar to another corporate job that I had done for 2 years. I think maybe a little over 2 years. And so I went to the boss. I had been there for a couple of months. I went to the boss and said, hey, I would like to get a promotion. I said, because I have the experience. It's clear that I'm meeting my numbers here. I'm excelling in my numbers. And I was bold enough to ask for a promotion and a raise. And, in so many words, they kind of just laughed in my face like, you're right. No, that's not going to happen. And so shortly thereafter, I left that job because I just wasn't happy. And so the Lord transitioned me to California. And I say transition, I was led to go to California. I went out there, I went through homelessness. And while I was homeless, I did put in for applications. And the same company that was in Atlanta was also in California. And so I interviewed for that company again. And the whole time I was just kind of like, I need work. And, I was hearing, family members and friends saying, you need to work. That don't make sense. Like you're out there, you're just out there, you need to work. And I said, yeah, you're right. So I was interviewing and the whole time in my heart, I was just like, I know God didn't lead me out here to work in corporate again. There's no way because of the way that I felt in Atlanta. I didn't feel satisfied in Atlanta. So why would he send me to another whole state to do the same job? I'm like, because I was a creative person. So I was like, there's no way that the Lord is sending me out all the way out here to California for me to do the same thing that I did in Atlanta. So I interviewed. And shortly thereafter, I would say maybe a month, they called me. Kimberly, we have a job out in Chinatown, 40 hours a week, $16 an hour. If you can type 60 words per minute, you got the job. And so I'm like, yeah, I absolutely can. But I wasn't even excited about it, right? So I'm talking to him on the phone and I hang up the phone and I started thinking, I'm just like, God, no, I don't want this. And that is the moment that my faith grew. That is the moment where I said, no, I'm going to wait on what God has for me. Because of what I was feeling, because of what I was sensing, I said, this is not what God has for me. So I didn't know how to say, no, I don't want the job. So I was like, I won't work this position unless you pay me X amount of dollars. So of course they never called me back. So there I was, still homeless, living in the shelter, without work, nothing coming in. I got all these bills due. And so we lived in kind of like a dorm setting. So I was like in a big room with 4 other women and it was open. We just had like a little locker and no dividers or anything. We could all see each other when we were sleeping. But we had like community spaces, and, we had like a computer lab, and then we had like like a little library area, just little things that we can kind of get into as we were staying in the shelter. And so one night God just gave me this idea for this story. So I'm up in the room and I'm in there for hours. And one of the residents, one of the young ladies, my roommate, she was one of my roommates. She came and she was like, "Oh, you're a writer?" I said, "Yeah, girl." I was in there working on this series called Just Saved. And I finished it that whole night. I wrote the entire series that whole night. And she was like, "Well, I didn't know you was a writer." I was like, "Yeah, because a lot of people didn't know what I did. I didn't talk about my creative when I was in California because I was going through so much. And so that was the last thing I wanted to talk about. But God just birthed this story out of me so powerfully. And so I'm in there, I'm writing. And so now she knows I'm a writer. So later, maybe a couple of weeks later, I'm walking down the hall and I walk past a computer lab. And she's like, Kimberly. And I was like, "Yes." And she said, "Hey, I got this email." She said, "I'm a writer." She's like, "But not like you." So she said, "This is like industry stuff. I'm going to forward this email to you." So I look at the email, and it's an email basically about veterans who want to get into the industry and how to be a production assistant. Now, by this time, I had already produced 2 full seasons of a series I did out in Atlanta called Never Stop. So I knew film, on the independent level, but I didn't know it on the Hollywood level. So I was intrigued. I said, this is the beginning, but it'll be nice for me to just go to this class and, figure it out. So it was like a 3-day class. So I went to the class, and I'm a note taker. So when I was in the class, they started talking. I pulled out my little book, and I was just writing whatever, and taking all these notes. I didn't realize that the guy that was in charge, he was a DP, and I hate that I don't remember his name, but he was a director photographer. I didn't realize that he was taking notice of me. So by the 3rd day, he walks up to me. He's like, "Kimberly," he calls me and then 2 other people, and he says, "Follow me." So we're following him, and we are at Sony Studios. So and I think, what's the name of that show? The Ship or something. It was a Navy show. This is back in 2018. Or 2017 is one of them. 2017. But anyway, so it's like The Ship or something, and it was like a Navy show. And so we're walking through, and we're walking through the props and just all this stuff. And so he takes us up into the production office, and I think there's a production coordinator there. And so he says, "These are my top 3 out of the entire class." And I was like, wow, you never know who's watching you. I didn't get a job opportunity out of that. I think he went with somebody else, the production coordinator. But there was one session that they had I think on day 2, they had a session, and there was a gentleman, he worked for WeTV. And he was telling a story. I was listening to him. He was very interesting, very engaging. And he was telling a story about how he went on set one day, and he sees like these guys struggling getting like cases of water somewhere. It was either cases of water or it was cleaning the bathroom. It was one of them. But he rolled up his sleeve and he started to do the work because he saw that it was work that needed to be done. And I remember when he told that story, I said, I want to work for him. I want to work for a boss that is not afraid to be the executive of a TV network and come on set and not be afraid to pick up cases of water or go and clean the bathroom or pick up trash. Like, yeah, I want to be your protege. So in my mind, that's what I said in my heart. I said, I want to work for him. So on the final day, night, we had like a little night get together at a bar. They drink a lot out there. So we had a little night get together out there. I stood out, and the DP, again, was watching me. He happened to be friends. Listen, look at God. He happened to be friends with the guy from WeTV. But I'm sharing all of this story, and I interviewed on that show, and not only did I get the job on WeTV, I actually took somebody's job. The job was already given to somebody else, and I found out that later. But you know that was just God. You know that was just the grace of God. But I'm sharing all of these details because it all started with me rejecting that corporate job. And because I was like, God, where is the moment where my faith was so strong in California? I was sitting here in my house like, when was it? And he was like, it was that moment. That moment when they offered you that corporate job, you knew in your heart that's not what you wanted to do. And you knew in your heart that's not what I had called for you to do. So I said no, even though I needed it. And so he related it to me working Uber. Like, I'm so sick and tired of driving Uber, y'all. Like, I bought my car at the end of 2023, November 2023. I bought my car, which is a 2024. I'm almost at 100,000 miles driving Uber. And I'm so, like, what do I have to show for it? Nothing. In my opinion, but a ran up mileage car, like nothing positive. And so what the Lord is just telling me is look at Uber like that corporate job. I ain't call you to come back to Atlanta to work. Uber, I didn't call you to do that because I don't even like it. Sometimes there are seasons where God will cause you to do something else, but there will be peace associated with it. I don't have peace driving Uber. Whenever I drive Uber, I'm like, oh, I gotta drive Uber. That's how I feel. And I shouldn't feel like that. God ain't in that. That's just me, toiling. So God was like, look at Uber the same way you looked at that corporate job. That was an opportunity for you, but you was like, no, I know God got something better. And so I began to just operate it and move in that, even with just writing that series, just Saved. That's something right now. A lot of people don't know I'm behind the scenes trying to get that joker funded, and it's going to get funded. You know what I mean? But and instead of me accepting that job, I said no. And then I went and I focused on what I felt like in my heart God was going to do. I wrote, I took care of my health, continued to meditate and do ministry. I stayed in my word. I worked on myself until God did what he did, which was something so small as having somebody say, hey, let me forward you an email. Like, really? That was the thing. I was waiting on that moment. I didn't know I was waiting on that moment, but God knew in my heart posture of faith, I was waiting on that moment. And that moment came, and God gave me favor continuously. Favor after favor after favor. So much favor. I barely ever, when I was in California, had to look for work. Once I started working, I was working. I was done with one job and somebody had referred my name on another show. Hey, you don't know me. I want to bring you in for an interview. Like, that's how it happened, back to back to back. So, I mean, to a point where I was like, I need to take a break. I need to go to Atlanta for a few days. I'm not working. Like, I could have continued to work in California if I never came home. But that's just how prosperous it was when I was there. But it was because of my faith. So I pray that this encourages somebody out there. I turned down that job when I still had bills that needed to be paid. I turned down that job because I knew in my heart of hearts that is not what God had for me. And I know even today, Uber is not what God has for me. That ain't what God has for me. Even though I have bills due, that ain't what God has for me. I pray that you are encouraged in your heart, in your faith, and I pray that you are blessed this holiday season. Merry Christmas to those for tomorrow. Feliz, one of my friends, he's from Brazil. He sent me that you're having Christmas today. So Merry Christmas to you, Anderson. But anyway, so yeah, God bless you guys. And I pray that you were encouraged by this word. All right. Talk to you later.